Opening the center and e-file immediately challenges black's response, setting the stage for dynamic central play. Opening the center symmetrically, both players vie for central square influence, setting the stage for dynamic middle game struggles. Developing the knight to attack the pawn immediately creates central tension and prepares for castling. Developing a knight to its natural square, the knight from c6 now shields the pawn on e5 and prepares for active participation in the center. Initiating the Ruy-Lopez, this bishop immediately claims influence over black's queenside coordination and eyes the critical f7 square. Challenging the bishop's placement directly, this pawn push forces a decision, potentially opening lines for black's pieces or gaining space. Doubling black's pawns creates a structural weakness, potentially freeing white's pieces for initiative. Doubling pawns on the c-file disrupts black's queenside structure, but opens the d-file for their bishop. Unleashing a central pawn thrust, white immediately challenges black's pawn chain and aims to seize the initiative. Shattering the pawn structure gains space, but exposes black's queenside to potential pressure. Unleashing the queen immediately opens up attacking possibilities, but exposes her to potential harassment. Recapturing the queen immediately simplifies the position, trading pieces to prepare for the middle game pawn structure and control of central squares. Reclaiming the pawn, white centralizes the knight, eyeing weak pawns and preparing to activate further. Developing the bishop to its natural square, this move aims to contest control of the central dark squares and prepare for castling. Developing the bishop here supports the center and aims to castle quickly, a sound positional foundation for the middle game. Castling queenside dramatically intensifies the central battle, preparing an immediate kingside assault on the unwary white monarch. Securing the knight and preparing for central pawn advances, while also potentially eyeing the c4 square. Launching a pawn offensive on the queenside, this aims to disrupt white's knight and gain queenside space. Repositioning the knight to the king's flank, aiming to connect the rooks and bolster the center. Developing the bishop to a more active diagonal, it now eyes white's pawn structure while preparing for potential counterplay on the queenside. Securing the king on the queenside allows for safer maneuvering and potential queenside pawn advances. Developing the knight to f6 prepares to challenge white's central knight and reinforces black's pawn structure. Bolstering the center's pawn structure, this move aims to prepare for potential pawn advances and prevent black's immediate knight sortie. Solidifying development, the bishop tucks away, preparing for potential action on the queenside. Freeing the knight from its defensive cage allows it to immediately contest the central space and prepare for dynamic advances. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure, 13. b6 aims to prevent white's knight from landing on the desirable c4 square. Controlling the important central squares and preparing to redeploy the knight to a more active position. Forcing the rook exchange simplifies the position, relieving some of white's queenside pressure. Liberating the rook from its d-file duties opens avenues for coordinated pressure along the open files. Centralizing the knight now aims to challenge white's central control and prepare for potential pawn advances on the queenside, a thoughtful repositioning. Developing the bishop to eye the d-file and support the knight's eventual advance to c4 offers valuable piece activity. Reasserting central influence and preparing to contest the d-file, this squares the pieces for the upcoming struggle. Consolidating central influence and preparing for queenside expansion by repositioning knight. Preparing to expand on the queenside, potentially challenging white's central control and opening lines for the rook. The knight boldly advances, eyeing the d5 outpost and potentially disrupting black's central pawn structure. Shifting the bishop to d8 offers it retreat from the knight's pressure, preparing a potential regrouping behind the pawn chain. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure, this aims to prevent knight incursions and prepare for a potential c4 advance, slowly building central influence. Unleashing the pawn's potential, this move aims to break free from passive defense and begin challenging white's space. Securing central space, this pawn advance aims to restrict black's piece mobility and prepare a kingside expansion. Shifting the bishop away from the d-file now prepares for a potential pawn push on the queenside, while simultaneously defending the knight's path. Unlocking the queenside pawn structure, white aims to gain space and potentially create a passed pawn down the file. Controlling the queenside pawn majority is now a key concern. This pawn push aims to prevent immediate advances. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure prevents potential black knight incursions on g4. A bold foray, aiming to disrupt white's kingside structure, but leaving the bishop somewhat exposed to potential future advances. Securing the king's safety by activating the monarch is paramount with the queens off the board. Consolidating the bishop's influence on the queenside while preparing to launch a pawn storm on the kingside creates interesting strategic possibilities. Anchoring your bishop to that central square solidifies control and prepares for pawn pushes. Reclaiming the e-file by this rook immediately challenges white's central control and aims to activate the piece into the fray. Attempting to consolidate pieces on the queenside, but it allows black's knight to become more active. Shifting the bishop aims to create a pawn break on the queenside, challenging white's central control and opening avenues for counterplay. Recapturing on f1 reestablishes knight mobility, eyeing further penetration or defensive support for the kingside structure. The knight retreats, regrouping for a central assault after the pawn structure solidified. Injecting a new attacking possibility, the knight repositions to eye crucial squares and bolster the queenside pawn push. Recentralizing the knight ignites a quiet battle for diagonal influence. Consolidating the knight to a more active central outpost. Clearing the path for the knight's central infiltration showcases a keen understanding of positional maneuvering. Liberating the bishop from its passive post on b7, preparing to contest the open files and enhance central influence. Exchanging this bishop liberates white's knight from its defensive burden, allowing it greater mobility. Reclaiming the knight opens a diagonal for your rook and pressures black's isolated pawns. Pushing the pawn aggressively creates a potential passed pawn, but weakens the king's pawn shield. Unlocking central files and preparing a royal advance, the monarch bravely steps into the fray. This knight now occupies a potent central outpost, dictating play and threatening white's pawn structure. Recapturing the knight opens the d-file for your rooks and aims to simplify into a potentially advantageous endgame. Recapturing the pawn opens a tantalizing diagonal for your bishop, aiming to dismantle white's central control. Seeking to exploit the open c-file, this knight repositions for potential queenside pressure. Shifting the rook to d8 opens a direct attack along the d-file, aiming to disrupt white's coordination. Opening the c-file aims to exploit the weakened queenside pawn structure and create attacking potential. Asserting central influence and preparing to contest the open files, this knight repositioning anticipates future pawn advancements. Clearing the c-file pathway initiates a promising pawn storm on the queenside. Accepting the pawn sacrifice opens up critical diagonals for your bishop, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure. Opening the file offers immediate pressure and a path for your rook, disrupting black's pawn structure. Unleashing a bold pawn sacrifice to shatter the opponent's central control and open lines. Breaks open the queenside pawn structure, aiming to activate your rook.